Ever think about, like, where big ideas actually come from? Like the really, truly profound insights. You know, like, what are some of humanity's biggest aha moments have roots in, well, a kind of surprising place, the plant kingdom?
That is a really interesting thought, isn't it?
Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take the sources you give us and dive deep into their most intriguing ideas. We try to extract the knowledge you need quickly, but like really thoroughly. We're going to try to have some fun, uncover some surprising facts, and hopefully spark some aha moments for you along the way. Today, we're diving deep into a really fascinating and, frankly, often overlooked relationship, the one between us humans and psychoactive plants, all based on the material you sent our way, of course.
Yeah. Always driven by what you're interested in. That's the beauty of this whole thing.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
we're specifically going to be looking at this through the lens of imagination.
Oh, I like that.
Right. Getting imaginative with it. And our source material for this deep dive is Terence McKenna's Food of the Gods, which I gotta say is a book that really gets you thinking about our ancient past and the possibilities for our future. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's lay out the mission for this deep dive.
Yeah, good idea. Set the stage.
Basically, we're going to explore this core idea that psychoactive plants might have played a crucial role in, well, a lot of things. The development of human consciousness, language, even culture and religion. Pretty big stuff, right?
Huge.
So buckle up, let's dive in. So one of the big questions McKenna tackles is like, where did this human capacity for self-reflection even come from?
Yeah, right. I mean, it's such a fundamental part of what makes us human. But where did it begin?
Okay, so McKenna proposes this fascinating idea, the missing link hypothesis.
Oh, tell me more.
Well, it centers around the idea that a specific type of compound indole hallucinogens might have played a, and I quote, decisive role in the emergence of human self-reflection.
Whoa, so like a chemical key that unlocked consciousness?
Exactly.
And to be sure we're all on the same page, maybe a quick breakdown of what exactly indole hallucinogens are.
Of course. So chemically speaking, these are molecules with a specific structure. You've got a pyrrole group linked to a benzene ring.
Mm.
And, without getting too bogged down in the chemistry.
Right.
The takeaway is that this structure allows these compounds to interact with our brains in ways that are, well, pretty profound.
Okay, got it. So examples of these would be?
Oh, yeah, tons. DMT, psilocybin, which is found in certain mushrooms, LSD, beta-carbolines, ibogaine.
A pretty diverse group.
For sure. Now, McKenna suggests that if a plant with these compounds was actually the catalyst, it would have had to meet certain conditions, like be present where early humans evolved, which evidence points to Africa, more specifically, a grassland environment. Think about it. That's where our ancestors started walking upright and eating a more diverse diet.
Right, transitioning from a forest-dwelling, primarily plant-based diet to a more, well, I guess you could say adventurous diet on the savanna.
Exactly. And this plant would have had to be psychoactive in its natural form, without needing any special preparation. Early humans didn't exactly have labs,
Huh.
right?
Yeah, no fancy extraction techniques.
Plus, it had to be readily available, easy to identify, abundant, for nomadic groups. Oh, and crucially, it had to provide immediate, tangible benefits for those who consumed it.
That last point is key, right? If it didn't offer some immediate advantage, it wouldn't become part of their regular diet.
Absolutely. So through this process of elimination, McKenna focuses on, drum roll please,
Yeah.
psilocybin-containing mushrooms.
Mushrooms, huh? Interesting.
And specifically, Stropharia cubensis, a type that thrives in, get this, cattle dung.
Whoa, okay, that image is vivid.
Right. Early humans start interacting with cattle as a food source, and bam, there are these psychoactive mushrooms just hanging out in the same environment.
Now that is a fascinating coincidence, or, well, maybe not a coincidence at all.
Right. So how did these experiences maybe jumpstart something as complex as, well, consciousness and language?
A huge question.
McKenna suggests that in the hallucinogenic state, language takes on a different dimension. It becomes, and I'm quoting here, objectified and visible.
So it's like the words themselves become tangible almost.
Exactly. Maybe those first attempts to communicate, to share an idea or a feeling, were sparked by this heightened awareness of language.
And this might have been happening while they're interacting with each other, in these new social structures that were emerging on the savanna.
For sure. And there's this other idea that the capacity to even form language was boosted by the mutagenic effects of these hallucinogens.
Mutagenic, you mean it actually changed their brains?
Possibly. Like affecting brain structures like Broca's area, which is involved in language processing.
Wow, so it's like these plants flipped a switch, leading to a sudden burst of language ability.
It's a fascinating idea, right? And psilocybin specifically is known to activate those brain regions involved in signal processing. And think about it, people on psilocybin sometimes experience spontaneous poetry, glossolalia. Oh yeah, speaking in tongues, basically.
Right.
It's like their brains are firing in these new, unexpected patterns.
Interesting. And, in some cultures where these mushrooms have been used for a long time, glossolalia is seen as communicating with spirits or, like, the divine.
Totally. And there's this great quote from Henry Munn that captures this perfectly. Language is an ecstatic activity of signification. The mushroom is the word.
Whoa, that's deep.
Right. It links the psychedelic experience with the act of creating meaning through language. And, if these experiences were common, then early human groups probably developed habits, patterns around their use. McKenna calls these creodes pathways of development that were strengthened through repeated use.
Kind of like neural and cultural grooves that formed over time, leading to more complex behaviors.
Exactly. And it's the heart of this is ecstasy. Not just pleasure, but a transcendent state where you overcome that feeling of separation from everything else.
Right, like the merging of self with the other, with nature, with the universe.
Yeah, a core concept in many shamanic traditions.
Yeah.
And R. Gordon Wasson, the guy who really brought magic mushrooms to the Western world's attention, called these mushrooms a detonator to the soul. Like they ignited feelings of awe, reverence, gentleness, even love.
Powerful stuff. So these experiences could have marked the very beginnings of, like, human spirituality, the birth of religion.
That's what McKenna proposes. But it's worth noting that not everyone agrees with this interpretation. Mircea Eliade, for example, viewed narcotic shamanism as kind of decadent. Like, relying on substances to reach those ecstatic states might mean the culture's spiritual strength is waning.
So two very different perspectives on the same phenomenon, which raises a fascinating question. Is one approach more authentic than the other?
Right, a big question to ponder. And McKenna also throws out this interesting idea that plant hallucinogens acted as feminizing agents.
Feminizing agents? How so?
He thought these experiences could balance out the more individualistic, maybe ego-driven values of the hunter with a focus on community, nurturing, and, well, child-rearing.
That makes sense if you think about how early human social structures were changing.
Totally. He even describes the ego as a calcareous tumor, dissolved by these experiences, returning us to a state of undifferentiated feeling, which he compares to the Tao.
Wow, that's a pretty radical way of seeing the ego.
For sure. Now, McKenna goes on to describe a sort of paradise lost scenario where humanity gradually moved away from this close relationship with the fungal world. He outlines 4 stages of this shift.
Okay, I'm interested. Lay it on me.
First, other psychoactive plants are substituted for the original mushroom. Maybe environmental changes or new discoveries led to this.
Makes sense. People are always exploring, experimenting.
Then inactive materials symbols replace the actual plants, like rituals and objects that represent the power of the mystery but don't directly affect consciousness.
Ah, like representations of the experience instead of the experience itself.
Exactly. And in the third stage, even those plant-based symbols fade away. Dogma, rituals, lineage, complex cosmologies. This is where organized religion as we know it takes root, according to McKenna.
That's a pretty unique perspective on the evolution of religion.
Right. And finally, the 4th stage, complete forgetting, we lose even the memory of the original experience.
Yeah.
And McKenna argues that secular scientism, especially in the 20th century, embodies this stage.
So we've moved from direct experience to symbolic representation to abstract belief to basically a complete denial of the mystery.
Exactly. And he uses the Eleusinian mysteries as an example.
The Eleusinian mysteries. Remind me what that was.
Oh, right. So in ancient Greece, it was this huge secret initiation ceremony. And to this day, we don't know exactly what went down. Some theories say they drank ergot-contaminated beer. Others say they consumed psilocybin mushrooms. Whatever it was clearly transformative.
Right. Shrouded in secrecy and clearly very powerful.
Totally. And there's mention of the Minoan civilization possibly using opium as a later substitute for earlier psychedelic practices. Like, as access to those earlier substances declined, they turned to something else.
Makes you wonder, like, how many different ways humans have sought to alter their consciousness throughout history.
Totally. And this brings us to the idea of dominator versus partnership cultural models.
Interesting. Expand on that for me.
Okay, so McKenna, drawing on the work of Rian Eisler, suggests that dominator cultures, those that are hierarchical, paternalistic, materialistic, and male-dominated, they actually suppressed what he calls the open-ended experimental investigation of nature that shamans were doing.
Wow, so like a clash between two totally different ways of relating to the world and, well, consciousness itself.
Right. He argues that this suppression of altered states comes from a fear of ego dissolution, of losing control.
Makes sense. Control is central to dominator cultures. Right?
Exactly. It's also tied to the suppression of the feminine, of the foreign, of anything that challenges the established order.
So controlling consciousness becomes a way of maintaining power.
Exactly. And a good historical example is the medieval church's suppression of knowledge about psychoactive plants during the witch hunts. They blamed magic on the devil and tried to wipe out any knowledge about those plants associated with witchcraft.
That's a pretty stark example of how institutions can suppress certain types of knowledge and experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But then comes the modern renaissance of psychedelics, as McKenna puts it.
Oh, yeah, the rediscovery, you could say, of these substances.
Exactly. Western science rediscovers New World hallucinogens, peyote, mescaline, ayahuasca, psilocybin, thanks to explorers, botanists, and folks like Lewin, Mitchell, Hefter, Spruce, Wallace, and of course Albert Hoffman,
The LSD guy.
the one and only. And the Watsons' 1957 Life magazine article, where they described their experiences with psilocybin mushrooms in Mexico, was a game changer. It brought the topic to a huge audience.
That must have been mind-blowing for so many people back then reading about these experiences.
Totally. And then, of course, LSD explodes in the 60s. McKenna saw it as this incredibly powerful deconditioning agent, capable of dissolving cultural norms and challenging those dominator hierarchies.
Yeah, LSD definitely shook things up. It challenged everything.
Big time. And then in the 70s, people started figuring out how to grow psilocybin mushrooms at home. No more trips to Oaxaca.
Right. The experience became accessible to more people.
Exactly. And as we look ahead, McKenna envisions a potential archaic revival, a return to a pre-industrial, pre-literate way of thinking about community, substances, and nature.
So, like, reconnecting with a more ancient way of being.
Yeah, he thinks plants offer us models of interconnectedness and resource management. And he argues for decriminalizing drugs, rejecting the idea of illegal plants, and embracing the legitimacy of nature.
A pretty radical stance.
Totally. He also talks about the possibility of a revitalized shamanism, communicating with the mind behind nature through these plants.
So using these substances as tools to access deeper levels of understanding.
Exactly. And he emphasizes consciousness expansion as the goal, not escapism. The psychedelic perspective, when truly understood, is about becoming more conscious, not less.
That makes sense. It's about expanding awareness, not checking out of reality.
Right. But he also acknowledges the threat these shifts in consciousness can pose to dominator cultures, which might explain why governments resist legalization.
Yeah, those in power often fear anything that disrupts the status quo.
For sure. And then McKenna gets really speculative, proposing that these hallucinogenic indoles might even be agents of evolutionary change.
Whoa, you mean they're actually shaping human evolution?
That's the idea. And he points out the structural similarities between compounds like DMT and psilocybin and our own neurochemistry, specifically serotonin, suggesting a long, maybe co-evolutionary relationship.
It's like our brains and these compounds have been dancing together for millennia.
Maybe? He briefly discusses the unique effects of DMT, its intensity and short duration when smoked, compared to injection.
DMT is definitely in a league of its own.
Totally. And he challenges the legal status of DMT and psilocybin as Schedule I substances, pushing for more research and exploration.
Yeah, the current legal framework definitely hinders scientific progress in this area.
For sure. And then he even suggests the existence of an interdimensional nexus accessible through these substances may be a connection to a larger overmind. It's a wild concept.
Definitely mind-blowing.
Right. And he wraps up by emphasizing the potential of these experiences for personal growth, healing, and understanding our connection to the plant partnership. So as we come to the end of this deep dive, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've uncovered. We explored this idea that psychoactive plants might have played a fundamental role in shaping humanity. We looked at the potential shift away from that relationship and the consequences. And we considered the modern reemergence of interest in these substances as tools for understanding ourselves and our place in the world. It's a lot to take in.
A lot to chew on, for sure.
Yeah. So, after diving into McKenna's ideas, what new perspectives do you have on consciousness, human history, and our relationship with plants? It's a question worth pondering.
It really is.
And If any of this has sparked your curiosity, please explore the source material and dive deeper. This is just the beginning, really.
Just a taste.
Exactly. And maybe, just maybe, the most profound insights aren't found through logic alone, but through the power of our imagination.
Who knows what we might discover if we let our imaginations run wild?